Like she said, I've now been a member of TAS for 25 years, and I'm also a steward with the Texas Historical Commission. They choose about 125 of us over various periods of time to be the go-between. And so education is part of that as well. For Waller County, John is one of the stewards, John Rich, and I am in Harris County, but I'm also a Region 5 representative, which means I get calls all the way up to Hearn sometimes. But that's just, if a landowner calls and says, who do I call? Can I pick this up? We either get them in touch with who they need to be in touch with, et cetera. I don't know if any of you saw last week on the news, my lovely little town of Tomball supposedly had a cemetery on Main Street. And we don't know what it is. We do know that the proper people at THC got notified the same day. They got back to them the next day. And now the landowner and an archaeologist are discussing what they need to do. And that, I wasn't totally responsible for that, but I know the people at the city council enough, somebody looked up my card. So it's very rewarding when we do something that can help somebody, whether it's a city or a landowner. So for my talk tonight, I won't say that as a volunteer, I am an expert in archaeology. I learn a little more every time I go. But this site that I've based, this website, texasbeyondhistory.net, is a wonderful place for you to go. And it is the best rabbit hole you could fall into if you're interested in history and archaeology. And so Jan and I talked last year, and she said, we get to see Sarah at San Felipe and talk about historic archaeology. Would you clarify some things on prehistoric archaeology? So I gave you a cheat sheet. I gave you a little timeline. And it is because even volunteers like us tend to say things like, oh, well, they have a bigger toolkit. And you're like, what are you talking about? What? So this tells you some of the things I'm going to discuss as we go through some different time periods. And I'm mostly going to focus on paleo, archaic, and then a little on late prehistoric. Again, if you go to this website, there are plenty of historic sites up to and including sawmills in East Texas. So we covered the very earliest in Texas and some very late things for you to be interested in. Whoop. There it goes. If you know anything about archaeology, you may know somebody that has this book, because if you have private property and are picking points off of it, people will say this is sort of the Bible of archaeology. It was written by Ellen Sue Turner and Thomas Hester. Thomas Hester is still alive and well. Ellen Sue passed away a few years ago, but they tried their best to classify and regionalize where you might find points and other tools as well, and freely available on Amazon. Now, a lot of people they call people and they say, can you identify this point or this arrowhead? That's what most people would call it. And John's probably better at that than I am, but what we urge them to do on private property is, do you have an archaeological site there? It's not just what you find, it's what you can find out about the culture that might have been there, the people that might have lived there. And I can give you a quick example. I had a student, I taught Texas history and science for many years. And I had a student that would occasionally bring me a broken point off their South Texas ranch. And I talked to his dad one day, and I said, I knew he had a ranch manager. The manager started looking for fire-cracked rock. This is just a piece of limestone, but it's red on one side where it was close to the fire. And if you start finding fire-cracked rock, you have found where people camped, either hearths or bigger things that you can look at. And he started putting GPS coordinates on them, and they were all so excited. So it not only let them know more about the people that lived there, but in case they ever do call out an archaeologist, it'll let him know a lot more about, what he can tell them about the site. We use the word provenience a lot. Again, you pick a point up and you give it to me. I have no idea where you got it. You may not have any idea where you got it. So provenience means if you leave some in where they belong, then we can tell a lot more about what it is. Now, of course, there's lots of them that erode out of creek banks and things like that. And I'll even tell you in some of the sites I'm going to go over, there wasn't a lot of provenience on some of them. They could describe what was there, but not necessarily exactly when. So we'll go on past this. Unfortunately, this poster is no longer available, but we gave out hundreds of them. TxDOT put them out. This is nothing but paleo points, since that's what I'm going to talk about first. Points that were older than 9,000 years back to 13,000 years. And now we know there were people living here as far back as 21,000 years. This was a beautiful poster. It encouraged people to be interested in archaeology a lot. And I ordered some educational materials from TxDOT yesterday, and it said, "Do you have any comments?" And I said, "Bring back the paleo poster." Okay. Timeline of native Texas periods. This is different from your handout. It's actually kind of hard to get one of these because in different parts of the United States, there are some slightly different nomenclature. It is nothing at all like European archaeology. But like I said, the three that I'm going to concentrate on are found here, where you have small bands of hunter-gatherers. That's Paleolithic, paleoarchaeology. When you get more and more different kinds of tools plus other objects, then you go into archaic. When you get all the way to where there's an increasing population and people using more sophisticated pottery and maybe settling and farming and using the bow and arrow, that's late prehistoric. People in Texas did not adapt the bow and arrow till possibly 1,000 to 1,200 years ago. And the same thing with farming cultures. There are several farming cultures in Texas, but most of them were not in larger groups until that point. If you are very interested in this or anything else I talk about, if Jan can give out my email, I have a document at home that I've put out, a Google Doc, just so you can see other areas to look at for archaeology. There was a wonderful talk by Clark Wernicke, who it was the head of the Galt School, one of the sites I'm going to talk about. And he talks about how we got the nomenclature we did, because people are like, you know, where's the Stone Age? It's all Stone Age. We didn't have anything over here but a little bit of copper for Native Americans to use. Okay, again, this is the map off the site I told you about. When people say, "Oh, really, is there any archaeology in Texas?" These are just the sites the site covers. And again, some of them are wonderful. Some of them I'll describe tonight. But for instance, if your grandchildren or children ever read the Hank the Cowdog books, there's Hank's house up at the top because the author owns a big site. And it's a very unusual site. It's pit houses. And so they named it after Hank. There's also things on the Bell. Everybody kind of knows the story of the Bell. The Bell in Fort St. Louis and LaSalle are covered very thoroughly, and the archaeology is covered. So again, a wonderful site to sort of get lost in. When you go to the site, when you're looking at prehistoric peoples, you'll come up with something like this. And you can see, of course, that this kind of mirrors the ecological areas that you might learn. They're a little bit different. But obviously, there would be very different cultures in some of these, and also depending on the time period because of climate change at the time. Again, when I first got involved in Texas archaeology, so only 25 years ago, even, people mostly talked about the hill country. So 1 and overlapping 5 and 6, because of course they have so much chert. They have so much of the stone making material. There are sites that have enough for 10,000 more years of people coming through and using chert. But they began to find, and they knew of other sites, But it became a little more important to start talking about South Texas, to talk about the farmers along the Rio Grande, and of course to talk about East Texas cultures, including trading around Houston. And by the way, it has to be trading because, of course, we have no rock, right? Again, just because we're kind of close to the coast, you can see that they also list some important sites along the Gulf Coast, and some right on, as you might expect, on Galveston Bay. But the one I'm going to show you first, sorry, is McFadden Beach. Doesn't look like much of an archaeological site. More Clovis points, more Paleo-Indian points have been found on this beach than anywhere else in Texas. And of course, it's because they wash up, because the site these people lived on was about a half mile offshore or better. When the glaciers were here, guess what? Ocean level's much lower. The first time I ever heard about this, I think, was about the time I got involved in archaeology, because there was a newspaper article on the Boy Scouts that found a mastodon tooth on McFadden Beach. McFadden Beach is closer. There is a Bolivar Beachcombers Facebook site, and they post points at least once a week. So, you know, they wash up in storms. They wait for a big high tide or a winter storm to help blow these things up. But like I said, the site is all washed up. It's whatever you can find on the beach. And this shows you a little bit more about it and where it is. It's to the east. McFadden Beach, no, I could use the pointer you showed me. McFadden Beach is listed here. But again, Highway 87 is not complete anymore. It got wiped out by a hurricane, back in the 80s. But so people four-wheel drive around this area, and that's where people still pick up points. Now, this man, who actually was a professor at Beaumont, but not in archaeology, has one of the biggest collections. And he used it freely to let other archaeologists look at it, because people find an occasional isolated point. Again, you can't tell anything about its provenience, but as a whole collection, they could tell a lot more about these people that would have lived offshore. The point that's highlighted there is a Clovis point. A Clovis has some very distinctive characteristics that's very famous, and I'll show you the other site associated with Clovis. But he has all sorts of stone tools, animal bone, and we're talking about Ice Age animal bone, camel, horse, mastodon, mammoth, giant sloth, I think. So you can see pieces of those bone that wash up on the beach. Actually, they found some bones like that out in the Katy Prairie, didn't they? A few. So we had a lot of Ice Age animals here. Whoops. Okay. There it goes. There it goes. Sorry. I'm sorry. So let's go to the Gault site. The Gault site, Gault, I don't know if it's listed, it's not, but it would go in the paleo section on your handout. Oh, it moved by itself. Okay. There we go. So the Gault site is a famous site in Texas. It has been known to exist since the 1930s. There were some early archaeologists that found out about it, and then the landowners let people pay for dig for a long, long time. But why did they come to this area? It's in the Georgetown, Williamson County area. But why did people camp for so long, 13,000, and even before that, years ago? There's a creek, Buttermilk Creek, that never dries up. It has 3 springs. Somebody just told me in a dry year, as many as 15 to 20 in a wet year. They've never known it to be dry. When you drive up to the Gault site, you're in this kind of property. you're in kind of what you expect in central Texas. It's dry, it has cactus, it has mesquite. But when you walk down a slope that goes about 75 feet lower elevation, it's a beautiful, heavy forested site. Oak trees, walnut trees. There's a huge bodark tree there. And so they had many different kinds of resources. And of course, the main reason, that's a chert nodule. They had an unending supply of chert. And I don't say that lightly. It was also very easy to find because the limestone walls were only about around most of the site are 3 to 4 feet high, and the chert nodules can be as big as footballs. And here's what a piece of it looks like, broken open, and then beginning the process of making tools out of it. Oh, it is our usually preferred name for flint. There's a little bit different geological, and points can be made out of other things that are. Flint, of course, the reason there's nodules is the limestone was forming. But they had a beautiful supply of this great chert to use. And the other thing that was really lucky for archaeologists to study is that even the pay for dig people, while they did some damage, and that's always kind of sad to see, there were so many other kind of points. And if you find a point, what do? You dig outwards. And so most of the Clovis stuff is down here. And so while there might have been Clovis points that were displaced by a stream or by erosion, whatever, there was an awful lot of things left for the archaeologists to study. And I got to go to Clovis on just my second field school and had a wonderful time, not knowing what I was sitting on, really. You get little bits of information at the time. Okay. There are tons of Clovis points, different sizes. Some of them have a white deposit on the outside, which means it's mineral that has been deposited on it over the years. These are approximately aged 11,000 to 13,000 years before present. They also found a lot of other tools, including Clovis blades. And the cores that they were taken off of. You know, there'll be a piece of rock and they will, using stone, peel off these little blades of all kinds. What was really interesting to me, I got to go to the lab one day. They found out that they were using the blades to cut a lot of grasses. They had silicon. If you cut a lot of grass because of the silicon in it, it will make it shine on the cutting edge. And that was kind of a surprise because the things they might have woven out of the grass, of course, didn't survive. This is a place that doesn't have a cave shelter or anything. Organic articles get wet and dry and wet and dry, and they decay. But they could see that they had used the grasses and, you know, possibly any grains like our wild rye and things that grow. Nope. Oops, sorry. Now I did it too far. There were also, and actually collectors found these. There was something that people were not familiar with. I forget how many there are of these now, but they are incised stones, possibly the first art, portable art in North America. They're way older than the rock art we have in Texas and other places. And some are geometric. There is one, and I couldn't find the photo that has a good distinction between the carved places and not. One of them, for all the world to me, looks like grass and grain. But for some reason, they were making these incised stones. One of the original ones, and I think it's the one on the left, was finally donated to the Galt School. And so they've been able to study more. I think there's, give or take, 20 of them that are known to exist. I'm forgetting to use my finger. Okay. If you have a chance, if you are interested in this site, like the rest of us usually are, Dr. Mike Collins is who saved the site, not only talking with the landowners over many years, but using his own money and raising money to buy this site so it can never be collected again. And the Archaeological Conservancy has it to protect it from now on. Dr. Collins, it had begun to lose his memory. And so they made this film about 3 years ago. For a while, you could find it on PBS, the PBS website. If not, Amazon has it for rent. It's about an hour and 20 minutes long, but it talks to a lot of archaeologists and also a lot about this very famous site. Okay. Yes. What? Oh, well, I didn't put that picture up. Thank you for reminding me. So what happened about 10 years ago, it was the theory of, well, Clovis is found all over the United States, and whoever this culture was, because it's not a named people, it's a culture and a technology, they managed to get all over North America in 1,000 years' time. It was very popular. It was a very useful set of tools, apparently. But they began to theorize, we have such intact deposits. What if there were people here before then? And so they opened a pit about half the size of this room, I guess, with a tent over it. 12 feet down, they began to find new signs of a culture. So it goes back now to 21,000 years, which coincides a lot with the footprints they found close to New Mexico in the sand dunes, or that sandy area in New Mexico. So there are several sites that are coming about with people were here before. The Clovis people and the people they taught just had a very successful culture. So yes, that drove it back to 21,000 years. And it has been confirmed on a site just across the creek. UT with their Galt, and then UT and Texas State had the Galt School of Archaeology. A&M had Buttermilk Creek, which is on the other side of the creek. Same sort of data has come out. Now we are talking just from the Clovis area, 500,000 artifacts. That includes the debitage, that includes all the tiny flakes, because that can tell professionals, for example, did they heat the stone? Chert gets different properties when it's heated. Where did is there some other stone that did they trade as well, even though they had, a site full of it? So they collect everything. But it's always interesting to see something coming out from them. This is a very different paleo site, and I want to use this one and the next one to tell you one other thing I don't want to forget. If you've been to, let's say, San Felipe, y'all do a class there, so it's almost 200 years old now. If it was a good site to settle 200 years ago, guess what? It was a good site 1,000 years ago. It was a good site 2,000 years ago. So when I give you these sites, they're not necessarily isolated one period of time, but they have good examples of what I'm trying to show you. Okay, but just remember, actually the first point I ever picked up at Galt was an archaic point, was a Hoxie point. And that's the reason I picked it up, is I picked it up and I went, well, what is this? And they said, well, it tumbled from down there, so it's not really anything, but we'll tell you what it is. But they identified to me immediately. People kept living here, obviously with their own sets of tools. So this is a very interesting one, this Kincaid rock shelter. This one has some very good educational materials with it. So these people were living there about the same time, because at this slide over here, this is a Clovis core. So there were Paleo Indians living there, but then these are archaic points, and that's a late prehistoric Perdiz point. So again, people lived here a long time ago, but they kept living here. Well, they're in a cave shelter, but so this is a really long time ago. The bottom of the cave shelter was paved with stones. Okay. Does this jive with what you know about what you think about primitive people? It was muddy. There were probably springs in the cave. They hauled up flat stones from the riverside. There's a lot of these kids down here are catching a river turtle. Single two most popular bones at almost any site are turtle and catfish. It's hard, no matter how much game is around you, to go out and kill a deer or think about a mammoth. But you can send the kids down to get a turtle and everybody still eats. So it's showing kind of everyday life with these people. So they paved the cave floor, they carried baskets of stones up, they ate what was in the river. And yes, all those people that are trying to frighten people that say there's alligators in Central Texas, well, there was. They may not be there now. And this man over here, I'm sorry you can't see the bone, but he has a butchered cave lion, an Ice Age mammal that would have been pretty terrifying. They killed dire wolves. They could kill almost anything. So again, the primitive culture kind of makes you think when you have a site like this. So there were a lot of large carnivores. They also found bone from the other things I mentioned: giant sloths, camels, horses, bison, alligator, including extinct bison, not just our current bison. But with there's a lot of stratigraphy to this site, layers where they could tell people were living, and then the lowest layers that were just water deposited flood material. So it's a good site to go to if you want to see what stratigraphy is in archaeology and how they can tell what they can tell about some of these places. The cave lion kind of got me. Dire wolves, by the way, could run as fast as a horse. They were much bigger than our wolves now. And you see that they've been killed all over North America. So again, okay. So again, archaic sites are hard to narrow down, but this one in particular, which is again not too far outside Austin, is a good one because it has, again, if you go to the archaic section, which is the bigger section, one over from Paleo, you see a lot has changed. They begin to use different toolkits, that thing at the bottom. If you find archaic caves, you see woven materials that survived. One of the important ones are earth ovens. Again, even though this was 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, that's an earth oven. They discovered that a lot of the plants they could get on a regular basis, especially if it was dry — this looks like a fairly dry area in the hill country — sotol, lechuguillo, wild onion, you don't get any food value out of them unless you cook them 24 to 48 hours. They made pits in the ground with a fire at the bottom, hot rocks on top, put the food in they were going to eat, cover it up with maybe cactus pads. Not unlike burying a pig these days to barbecue, but they discovered they needed that plant matter to survive. And this was how they got the nutrition out of it. There's a very complicated carbohydrate in those kind of plants, and you have to break it down with heat. Again, I was totally amazed when I learned this. They also had archaic people show a bigger variety of other stones, not just projectile points, grinding stones, different kinds of hammer stones. Again, their whole toolkit is a little bigger. This site was actually excavated by TxDOT, which is another point I usually bring up. A lot of archaeology that's done is because it's in the way of public lands. They build a new bridge. This was a highway out toward Williamson County, I think, or toward Leander. And so TxDOT did the original excavation on this in the 80s. And they found a burial, one of the oldest burials that we knew of. It was 85. The burial's 11,000 years old. It was a paleo burial. And for a long time, they called, since it's close to the town of Leander, they called the skeleton Leander Man until somebody pointed out it was a woman. So now it's Leander Woman. And for a long time, they had they had an archaeological exhibit of this in the museum, but it has changed, our museum here in Houston. It has changed so much. We have a lot of other archaeology there now. The other thing that was interesting here, because of these earth ovens, sometimes if we find a big enough piece of charcoal, we can identify, we have an archaeobotanist who identifies the kind of wood it came from. But in this case, she took the ash, and there's a technique, and she picked up the pollen of the plant in the area, tiny plant remains, and other things, and enough charcoal to do carbon dating. So they could tell a whole lot about this site. And the archaic points are on the next slide. You can see what generally they call these stemmed points. They're a little different. There's a couple of different ones. Lanceolate are kind of thick and heavy, split stem. So a lot of new kinds of points are seen in archaic sites, a huge number of point types in archaic sites. They began to adapt their technology to different things. The slide on the right is the full range of points, which are late Paleo at the bottom and then archaic going up. And so again, people lived here for a long time. Okay, one more. Who doesn't like a good buffalo jump? We have a couple in Texas. In fact, they just discovered a new one a few years ago. John got to work on it for a couple of, were you there in the winter? The new one they discovered is not accessible to the public, obviously, but it is part of one of the state parks. And they actually drove the cliff at different times. And there's a bunch of different jump sites at that one as the cliff eroded. But the cliff was actually on private property, but the bison had the good sense to fall within the state park. So that's how come we're going to get a lot of news about that one. Bison jumps are found, and other ways of trapping and killing bison are found all over the plains, especially. This happens to be the furthest one south in this part of North America. It's about 11, the first jump was 11,000 years. It was on private property. The Skiles family in 1953 brought people out. They just liked the little cave. You know, you're going into years and years and thousands of years of dust deposits. But then they began to see what was actually there. I talked to somebody before the talk. We were talking about bone beds. What did they butcher, and how do you tell? There was a paleo bone bed that wasn't very big, but when you want to talk about archaic, this is quite a thick bone bed here. It was bone bed 3 with modern bison in it. These are pretty much articulated bison. In other words, we have seen, even on the sites TAS has dug, we have found articulated jawbones, articulated shoulder joints. This, they could pretty much tell a lot about the bison that they killed. They also have, since it is in a cave for the first time, or one of the first times, they found a fiber layer. They found some of these woven mats, woven sandals, and things like that that they were able to document from long ago. And these, of course, are the archaic points. This is, oh, John, Castroville. This is one of the most popular in the hill country. And then there are other kinds of points found there as well. But again, buffalo jumps are pretty exciting. There's a couple in Texas, and always finding new information about it. But again, they're also listed for you to look at. So then we have lots of, in the Pecos Canyonlands, where the Pecos and the Rio Grande run together, Devil's River, that area. We have found out a lot about archaic life due to the cave shelters, because it protected the things they had. There's also smaller rock shelters. This one on the right is too shallow and steep to live in, but that's where rock art is often found. Rock art. So we have a very famous collection of rock art from about 4,500 years ago along the Pecos Canyonlands. This is one of those things that until maybe 15 years ago, they were like, well, they're nice and y'all have learned all about this. And there's a school called the Shumla School that still studies these and preserves them. But, you know, it's been so long ago, you'll never figure out what they mean. Come look at the rock art book up here. Carolyn Boyd, Dr. Carolyn Boyd, who was an art history person, went back and got a PhD in archaeology. And by comparing these paintings to those in Mexico and New Mexico and talking to existing elders from some of the tribes that are still there, they were like, oh, that's our story about so-and-so. So we've learned a tremendous amount about rock art. The Shumla School, SHUMLA, if you're interested, the Shumla School also has lunch and learn programs for free. You can hear their people talking about various things if you're interested in rock art. It's a very beautiful site. Hey, one more. The race to save Pecos rock art, of course, not only from, yes, it is. The white one there is white shaman. There's a curly tail lion that's really neat. They are difficult to get to, but remember, we've also had big lakes down there that have built and destroyed some of the rock art. That's the Shumla symbol here when you get close to their property. This archaeologist over here is Harry Schaefer, who's one of the more famous he's one of the big three, as my husband and I like to call them. Harry Schaefer wanted people to be able to see these. If you can hike, you can go to Seminole Canyon and about a half mile, not flat, but not impossible for a lot of people hike. You can make arrangements to see some rock art in Seminole Canyon, which is a state park. A lot of these are very inaccessible, probably to the good, since that way they weren't all destroyed. But Harry Schaefer wanted people to be able to see more of this. And so if you go to the Whitty Museum in San Antonio, they have a beautiful display where you feel there's a three-dimensional, basically, you feel like you're in front of some of the rock art there. And that may be a good way for you to see it. I was very impressed. It's been open about 8 years. Okay, here's a cave that I put up. This is off the Pecos as well, because you can see how careful they were. There's a lot of stratigraphy. There's also very carefully mapped out sites for these people to use this cave shelter. It was particularly good because it had a layer of boulders in front of it. There's an entrance. They have, trash zones. They have hearths where they cooked. They had latrines. They had sleeping areas. And it holds a lot of information about how these people lived. This particular cave has 9,000 years of habitation. Again, people came back later because, again, up here at the top are some arrow points. So people were living there not too long ago, and they were living there as far back as late Paleo. Here are some of the woven goods that were preserved in the cave. This is a bone. They think it was a bone awl. They began to make more tools out of bones. There's a lot of, I believe in this cave, over 100 examples of sandals, woven mats. There are little tiny sleeping spaces that were lined with like rabbit fur. So this was, again, a very interesting site to look at. And then, of course, the best of all, that's a human coprolite. These people, and you take them and you reconstitute them and you look to see what they ate. They're beginning to find DNA in some. In this case, these people lived in at such a time, it was dry. So what did they eat? It's described in the site as anything that wiggled, squiggled, or crawled. They ate snakes, they ate lizards, they ate spiders during particular times when there were droughts in this place. It was excavated by Texas A&M in the 1970s, and of course, a huge number of not only artifacts, but other things they were able to look at. Okay. I did not put too many late prehistoric sites in here because if you know anything about Texas archaeology, you've probably heard about late prehistoric sites. Who are the people living here right before the Spanish came or within 1,200 years? When the Spanish came. One hour away from where John and I were at field school this year is called the J.B. White site. He was a collector because it was legal to do so at the time. And he spotted dozens of sites along the Little River, which runs into the Brazos. And that's pretty close to where John and I were looking for a Spanish presidio. Again, why did they live there? Well, this is kind of like where we live. Deer, pecan, rabbits. They had a very good, there was water usually in the rivers. One unusual thing at this site is they ate snails. And this is sort of a comedy routine in archaeology, because usually the first thing we ask when we start finding snails is, tell me we don't have to count them. In this year's case, no, we didn't. They were mostly just the little snails you see around. But in some cases, they did eat. I've got shells up here of, scallop and clam. They ate oysters. But they believe they ate Rhabdotus snails. They're the slightly larger, elongated ones. And again, if you ask 3 archaeologists, you'll get 5 opinions on whether they did or not, because I've had people stand there in front of me and go, okay, what are snails attracted to? They're attracted to the old campfires because the organic matter left, the fat and stuff left. And I just talked to a archaeogeologist who is working on a site where the snail bed is 8 inches thick. He goes, that's not by accident. So anyway, so these people most of the time had a very varied diet, but when they had to, they ate snails. This is also in another one of those ecotomes that overlaps. So they're bordering Blackland Prairie and oak and like the live oak and water oak woodlands. So again, a lot of different materials to eat and to live on. And of course, later on in this area, like this man found dozens of sites, but later on in this area, for what we were doing last year at our field school, the kids were on an archaic site. It was on a little hill that, because they don't have any, they call Long Mountain, but it's a little hill that had an archaic site on it. And we found much of the same thing that would be described in this site. And they think that this would be a very rich area to study. It's mostly private property, but we have a lot of good landowners that, freely want to find out what their private property is. Okay, if you know, a lot of people, if they know nothing else about archaeology, they've heard of the Caddo. And the Caddo, of course, the tribe still exists. They began to be better organized. They're probably part, or I've never read anything that says they're not, part of the Mississippian cultures that go all the way up to like St. Louis, across from St. Louis. These were a little later getting organized. We also think there was a pre-Caddoan people called the Fushmaline that had they were beginning to get organized and farm and things like that. This was excavated, and of course the El Camino Real runs right through it in Alto, through the historic site. It was excavated first as far back as 1938. This was part of the WPA program that employed people, just like the WPA that then built some of the entrances to our state parks. They actually did archaeology. They dug down through the three mounds. They found out that the three mounds are they're one is a ceremonial mound, one was a burial mound, and then there was another that was for like activities of these people. These people were very well organized. Not only did they grow corn, squash, and beans, like most of the tribes we think of when Europeans started coming over, they had a settled life, they had elaborate rituals, they had ranked societies, they were a matrilineal society. Mound building, they can tell you how they built the mounds because there are borrow pits there. They carried thousands of baskets of dirt to build these mounds. And luckily, we have dug on some Caddo sites because there were Spanish missions next to some of them. Their houses, which has been mirrored in a new construction if you go to the park, were built of pine saplings, willow poles, and then the river grasses that were put on top. So a lot of times you'll find round ones. Where the kids group was a couple of years ago, we found more of this kind of structure. We were expecting the post holes to be round and they were straight. So they were in another kind of outdoor structure that they used in the summer, go figure. They're also known for their pottery and a lot of things, a lot of their other rituals that have survived within the Caddo people. And in the burial mound, there were deposits of specially made points. So, but again, most people have heard of the people that were here. Now, again, you'll have archaeologists argue, do you think the Karankawa were in Galveston? A lot of people will tell you now they were closer to the coastal bend. They were Victoria and Corpus Christi. We also have the Spanish records that list hundreds of tribes that called themselves by names that we've never heard of. When we were on the Little River last year, we were, the Tonkawa people have actually, the Tonkawa, who are buffalo hunting people, have actually gotten part of their sacred lands back, and they let us survey because they want to make it a park that's accessible to people. So Texas history usually shows a map that's got 6 or 8 people on it, and of course the Spanish would have told you they're literally hundreds. Please go to Caddo Mounds if you get a chance. If you have followed the history at all, they have the Caddo elders with a lot of volunteers, including from TAS, rebuilt a Caddo house. And then the first one that was built, there was a terrible storm. And it paralyzed one of the archaeologists that we knew. Another woman died that was not too far from the site. And they rebuilt it 3 years ago, 4. They have rebuilt it again. They have reconstructed the inside of how it would be. The most interesting thing I found out when we went to see the first one was there's no smoke hole. They had fires in the center, but there's no smoke hole because if the smoke diffused out, it kept the insects from destroying their house. Very smart. And then, of course, you can see the mounds. There's a lot of interpretive material. There are a lot of copies of pots and other vessels that they were known for. Please go. That's one of the nicer state parks in terms of their history. But again, go to Texas Beyond History and you can learn a lot more, including of these late prehistoric and then what happens when the Europeans come. I will be happy to take questions. I just want to thank Texas Beyond History. This is a site that UT and Texas State started, and unfortunately, it's had a lot of grants cut. Because there were new exhibits being processed, but there are a lot for you to look at. Thank you for bringing me to talk about prehistory, and your timeline is courtesy of Texas Parks and Wildlife, a coloring book called The Indians of Texas. So, but I used it for my school kids, and it made a big difference in how to think about what people find and where and how old it might be. Do I have any questions? Yes. Yes. Oh, the question was the TxDOT archaeology along Highway 99. If you haven't heard about it, I can give you a quick summary. When they were building 99, they changed the route several times. You know, there was already a big furor over disrupting the flyway and everything else. But they put a bullseye on an archaeological site that they knew had been there. They knew about it from the 1980s. And so it turned out to be a much bigger, much more extensive site. They thought it was probably archaic to late prehistoric. And then the first point that was found was a Golandrina, which is paleo. And they went, oh, wow. So they did as much as they could within the time slot. You know, TxDOT waits for no one. But they let a private landowner stepped up, and they transported, after mapping depth and position on the site, they transported 55 dump truckloads of dirt, and we screened it for a solid year. The Houston Archaeological Society, other volunteers that came in. And again, they told, even after they found the old point, they told the archaeologists, they said, oh, you'll find 100 pieces of whatever that you can look at. 1,000 pieces of bone, pottery, points of all ages, and stone from as far away as Arkansas, Louisiana, Central Texas. It was a trading site. They also found burials, which were covered up quickly. We cannot excavate burials or grave goods. And they have a cap on it, so it can't be disturbed. There's a little low bridge where there shouldn't be a bridge, and it covers up the burial site. It is 2 miles south of 290 on Cypress Creek. It's on an old bed of Cypress Creek in the floodplain still. When 99 was first opened, I could always identify it. I could see. Now it's all grown up with willows and stuff. But yeah, it's about 2 miles south of 290. And the report's still being written. This was 2015. We can't, yeah. Well, TxDOT reports sometimes take a long time to be written. Not all of this, because we know TxDOT archaeologists, and you know, I teasingly yell at them a lot. They're only given money from the state for this kind of stuff in increments. So it's like, oh, here's money to do the points. Here's money. So yes. Oh, my husband is asking about the one and only archaeological find I've made on my own, thanks to a very generous landowner. A friend of mine from the private school I taught at called me one day, and she said, I've got an arrowhead. Can you identify it? And I said, probably not, but I have friends that can. I'll get good pictures of it. I'll find it out for you. And she brought it up in a shoebox. And I said, why do you have it in a shoebox? It's going to get broken or chipped. She goes, it barely fits in the shoebox. Wasn't an arrow point. It wasn't a spear point. It was, they were more nicely made, but it was like this, except bigger. They're preforms. Somebody made them to trade. It's only 8 or 10 miles as the crow flies from that 99 site, but we didn't know that then. Worked on both sides, some of them up to 15 centimeters long. We went out in the field after I asked her if we could go to where it was found. And this is an unbelievable story, but I can swear that it's true. We had kids in the car with us. We drove out into their pasture because there is a place they were scraping gravel. Gravel around here are those little tiny iron nodules that are deposited by bacteria. And she said, we're scraping gravel back here. This is probably where my husband found it. And I turned the corner so I wouldn't sink into sand. And one of my daughters said, they're all over the ground. I picked up 16 the first day. Larry had another one in his truck. A&M came out, and it turned out to be a bunch of preforms. But there's a special test they can do now to tell how long they've been buried in the sand. They were about 8,500 years old. The landowner has them. They're his. He let them be displayed a few times at A&M, and somebody was able to finish their PhD off of that site. So he was very happy to have been given that program. But yeah, that was very exciting to me, and I'm so glad the landowners were so amenable. They liked A&M. They were all set to go with them. Yes, that's what I said. His name was Victor Galan, and unfortunately, he was the man who was paralyzed in the Caddo Mountains. He is still a working archaeologist, and he has been put on the national parks, like archaeology. He's on a board to oversee like national park archaeology. He's still a functional archaeologist, and he gave the kids at field school a heck of a tour. So, anything else? Yes. Mhm. Um, I would advise you to pick up one of those little black folders that gives you like 7 sheets that tells you all about Texas archaeology. If you are on private property and the landowner is amenable, you can pick things up. If you are in any state or national park, there is a huge fine. I would advise you not to take anything. Well, it goes along with that sign that says no plants, animals, rocks, yeah, artifacts. Um, it depends on the local parks in different places. Harris County does not want anybody picking up anything. I found somebody that was about to go digging along Spring Creek and just happened to see a constable, and he went in to chase him out. Spring Creek and Cypress Creek have been gutted by people digging in the bank. We don't have all that many artifacts, but we'd like to, for an archaeologist to find them maybe. You have to check. Like I said, I have read that some city parks in different small cities will allow you to metal detect or hunt. You can't even metal detect out here. Please stay off our battlefields. Those are also state or national parks. So it's that kind of a thing. There are very specific rules. Any human remains are a no-no even for professional archaeologists. That goes back to a law called NAGPRA about not collecting or displaying anything like that anymore. If you'll notice, a lot of the national parks that used to have artifacts like Mesa Verde now have facsimiles. And no human bones or grave goods. When we do our digs, we're always hoping we don't stumble upon a skeleton, because the first thing you do is you have to call the sheriff and the coroner to make sure somebody didn't off somebody and plant it in your archaeological site. I mean, that is the joke, but then if it's not, they try to get a consortium of people like the Caddo, even if it was here, a consortium of tribes that would have an interest and allow them to rebury them. Yes. They cannot take the land away from you or any artifacts if it is on your own property.
Yeah, a few tanks.
It's a federal law. Yes. The question was, what happens if you do find something? Is there somebody you can call? Can you report it to somebody? I think Sarah probably told you, like on historic land like San Felipe, the gophers dig up stuff. The bioturbation, they bring up stuff, and they don't want you to pick it up. You can report something like that, or photograph it and show them at the desk, because although again, if it's not where she can tell what it is, it's not worth a whole lot. If it's other places, I have friends who are archaeologists, and they're taking a hike in some state or national park, And one of them that's a good friend of mine, her husband looked down and went, "Isn't that a stone axe?" And she picked it up and threw it under a bush. I mean, you don't want to take it. It may not be worth the archaeologist's time to go get it. And so you just put it out of sight, hoping it'll stay there. I mean, that's kind of a sensible way to do things.
So Terry has a question in chat. It's pretty long. I'll summarize it. Basically, a relative has collected a lot of arrowheads in Texas. And at some point, he added a human skull to the collection. And she wants to know what they should do about that. He's now deceased.
I have yet to actually have that come up as a steward. I do know that in Texas, any state institution cannot even have it. I have known some people that simply went out and reburied it on their property rather than have to explain to federal officials. I do know that the only two places I know of that have been allowed to keep any human remains, and they're private institutions that use them sparingly. I know Rice still has some, don't they? Or have they gotten them? There are only a couple of repositories for all sorts of artifacts. One's in San Antonio. The big one is in Austin. Austin, I know, will not take any human remains. The best thing to do is to, if you want to report it, it's going to tie you up in some paperwork. But I have known people that told me they buried, and again, that's few and far between for me in 25 years. I've only been on one site in our summer digs that ever exposed a human bone. They partially exposed a human bone. We were close to Caddo territory. The elders came out, did a ceremony that night, and we simply moved over. We want to be respectful and, again, not violate any laws. If there's nobody else, I have different artifacts. We do not collect since we are stewards. I have a friend who is an antiques dealer, and he has brought me things he has found when people were getting rid of estates. Most of this were from collections where they didn't mean anything to the collection. For example, they picked up a piece of pottery in the parking lot of the site they were working on, and they're nice enough to share with some of us who take teaching collections around. But we don't buy, sell, or trade artifacts. So these are just for a teaching collection. But you're welcome to come up and look at anything. I've got some. I kept the historic artifacts because the kids wanted to look at them yesterday. But there's a lot of prehistoric things up here too, and of course a lot of them are pieces of artifacts because we don't find whole ones very often. We find the pieces they threw down. Or I showed this one to the kids yesterday. This one had every evidence of being a good spear point till they got to where they couldn't thin it anymore, and it's a hook on the end, so they threw it down. So, all right, thanks very much. Oh wait, one more question. Liberty has a very unusual museum. It is at the Sam Houston Regional Library. And what happened with it was about 10 years ago, a man had been a collector for many years when it was legal to do so. And his stuff was sitting in the top of the library. And they asked some of the HAS members to sort and classify as many as they could. So one room of that museum has pull-out drawers where they are labeled. They'll tell you the point type and the approximate age. And it's free. You have to sign in and out because it's a library they use for people looking up records. But it is a very interesting place where you can get a little more up close than you can in a normal museum. So thanks for prompting me on that.